So, this year's been a roller coaster of emotions for Death Battle fans. The recent permanent closing of Rooster Teeth had put our favorite web series in a very scary and unknown spot for the better part of this year, and it led to a lot of us worrying that we may have to say goodbye to the series for good. But, thankfully, the recent updates from the team has given us hope that Death Battle will return someday, in some form or another, basically stomping any fears that it may have to go on an indefinite hiatus like we feared. While this good news has left us all in higher spirits than we ever had been while we initially heard the news of Rooster Teeth's closing, it does mean that we still won't have any actual Death Battle episodes for at least this year, and maybe longer than that. This video had been planned a while before the official good news announcements from the Death Battle team came out, and was originally meant to be some sort of commemorative video for me to show my appreciation towards the series that's left such a big impact on my life. But now that we know that the show isn't going under, consider this more as a celebratory video to commemorate the eventual return of this beloved show. I basically started this channel by covering Death Battle stuff, through trailers, through rankings and reviews, all the basics of a typical Death Battle tuber, but I don't think I've ever given a clear list of my favorite episodes. I have my absolute favorite episode, and an episode I consider my number 2 favorite, but I never really settled on a 100% accurate top 10. And since you guys asked for this to celebrate me hitting 500 subscribers a month ago, I decided to scope through Death Battle's 10 seasons to find out what my absolute favorite episodes are. So this should be a fun learning experience for all of us, because I've hardly ever discussed which Death Battle episodes are my absolute favorites besides my number 1. So, no use stalling any further, let's just get into it.
It's your fearless, yet lovable leader, Principal Perry. I am stuck in the elevator. Repeat, I am stuck in the elevator. Again, I am stuck in the elevator!
A show that's really grown on me in the last 2 years is Bleach. For a series that started 23 years ago, it feels so unique and different from any other Shonen that's come out before or since then. The characters are all really endearing. Ichigo himself, I think, is a really interesting and compelling main character. And I think the power systems of Bankais and Hollows is one of the coolest power systems ever made. You get the point. So it was only natural that my appreciation of Ichigo vs. Naruto grew over time after seeing both series. Since when the episode came out, I hadn't seen either, actually. But now that I have, I can appreciate this episode a lot more. The rundowns are alright, nothing really super noteworthy despite a few good jokes here and there. They were able to fit in a lot of the major story beats and cover their entire power sets in a pretty well-paced fashion considering how long both of the series are, though that unfortunately came with the cost of ignoring basically all of their character stuff. Despite some minor story coverage every now and then, the entire thing is just covering their abilities and super forms, ignoring basically the entirety of their character arcs and development. No mention of Naruto's isolation and longing to fit in, nothing of Ichigo's insecurities and, well, depression. Just their super forms, basically, which is fair considering they both have a lot of super forms. It's just unfortunate that they didn't bother to cover the two of them from a character standpoint, which is what makes them so interesting to me, anyway. Anyways, not really much else to talk about with the rundown, let's get on to the fight. And I'll be the first to say that I think this is one of Death Battle's better sprite fights. The sprites mesh really well together, obviously since they're from the same game. The backgrounds look very nice, the close-up shots look very good and aren't jarring at all, and the choreography is just really good and has a great focus on the speed of these two characters, and just how fast their attacks are. I like how Naruto remains the more crafty one out of the fight, using various ninja tools and his more outside-the-box abilities to keep Ichigo on his toes, while Ichigo just kind of remains a straight brawler throughout the whole thing, which is fine since that's how he fights in the series anyway. The voice acting is also really good. Don M. Bennett's Naruto voice is super good that I'd put it on par with the original dub voice, and in my personal opinion, thinks it sounds a lot better than the original dub voice. No respect to Molly Flanagan, of course. Her voice for Naruto has always been great, and she is also the main character in one of the best Disney shows ever, Lab Rats, so she gets a pass from me. As for Ichigo's voice actor, well, it's Johnny Young Bosch, what do you want me to say? Not only is his voice for Ichigo in the original series one of his best performances in my opinion, he carries that same energy from the original show that I loved into this episode. He keeps that same level-headed attitude that's a staple to the character and gets some great lines in, especially in the latter half. I'd expect nothing less from everyone's favorite Power Ranger. The writing in this episode is probably the main draw for me and why I love it so much. Not only are Naruto and Ichigo incredibly accurate to how they are in their respective series, the way they interact with each other is also really great. Ichigo's frustration at Naruto's retreating and to his naked girl jutsu, Ichigo's nonchalant response to having to fight an entire army of Naruto's believe it catchphrase being turned into a chill-raising one-liner. The character writing in this episode is definitely the highlight for me, which is odd considering the lack of attention their characters got during the rundown. The fight's paced also really good as well. All of their important forms are given time to breathe and get the attention they deserve, and don't really linger longer than they need to. Naruto remains in his Nine-Tails chakra mode throughout most of the fight, and Ichigo remains in his hollow form through most of the middle half. I am kind of disappointed that his hybrid Bankai form was glossed over so quickly and got bodied basically immediately, but I liked his line. I'm pretty sure the yo was a reference to when he first saw Orihime in the form for the first time, which is a touch that I liked. The death is also stellar. Ichigo becomes Zangetsu, or Black-Haired Ichigo, or whatever you want to call it, and unleashes Mugetsu. And the way the music cuts out as the Mugetsu consumes Naruto and all of his clones is bone-chilling. I love it. But not as bone-chilling as the following scene, where after a few moments of silence, Naruto screams Kurama into the wind. It becomes the Nine-Tail Super Duper Akuma form, or whatever it's called. Which is an absolutely hair-raising scene and was done masterfully. And I love that despite being completely drained of power, drained of everything, Ichigo still decides to die standing and fighting, grabbing a nearby stick and staying on his feet as the giant three-headed fox demon throws a nuke at him and reduces him to atoms. Does the death hurt a bit more now that I'm a fan of Ichigo? Yeah. Do I care? Nah, not really. This, in my opinion, is one of Death Battle's better anime fights, and I'm surprised I don't really hear a lot of people talking about it more, despite it being one of the biggest legacy matchups that they've done throughout their run. I don't really see much discussion around it, which is kind of a shame. I don't think it's the pinnacle of Death Battle or anything, but I do think it's a great episode that deserves to be discussed a lot more from what I've seen. And I'd also like to see these two come back at some point. Naruto has a few matchups. I think Luffy's the most popular one. I'd be fine with that. Ichigo has a couple. His most likely would probably be Yusuke, but you guys know me at this point. Ichigo versus Percy Jackson for Season 11. Let's go!
Oh, hey Nezuko, you're still alive! Can you help me dig some holes?
It's really weird that a matchup involving two protagonists from two shows I couldn't care less about is ranked higher than a matchup involving two protagonists I love to death. But that's just the way the world goes, I guess. And also just goes to show how amazing Tanjiro versus Jonathan is. If you guys remember my Season 9 ranking from way back when it sounded like I was recording using McDonald's drive-thru mic, I put Tanjiro versus Jonathan at number 3 on my ranking. And I'll be honest, I don't know what I was thinking. SpongeBob vs. Aquaman and Vegeta vs. Thor can eat it, because this episode is incredible. The rundowns are alright, definitely the weakest aspect of this episode. I did like how they deliberately take note of their soft and compassionate personalities despite living in a world where demons and vampires are just running around. And I really like the way that Jonathan's ended, talking about the legacy that he spurred on, even though he died young, and the Ripple meme at the very end. I did enjoy that. Tanjiro's gets kind of brought down by going so far out of its way to avoid manga spoilers that it hardly feels like they cover its story at all. But at the end of the day, they did get all of the important stuff covered for the sake of the episode, so I guess it balances out. It's nothing to write home about, but it's not nearly mediocre enough for me to bring it lower than where it is right now, because the fight is my absolute favorite of Season 9, no questions, which is impressive considering the competition of that season. But for me, it's super clear. The background and settings are gorgeous, the colors are just so vibrant and beautiful, the music is incredible, the effects are equally as stunning. Despite the static-looking appearance of some of the water-breathing shots, they're still drawn beautifully. The voice acting is just phenomenal. Benji Buckley gives one of my all-time favorite performances in the entire series. Every single one of his lines is delivered with such a passion and energy that most voice actors could only wish to achieve, and in my opinion, completely steals the show. Not to say that Zach Maher doesn't do a good job, his voice for Tanjiro is perfect in my opinion, and gets the mannerisms and the energy of the character down quite good, but they don't compare to Benji freaking screaming his overdrive lines at the top of his lungs. The character writing and interactions are on par with Naruto vs. Ichigo in my opinion. Both of them feel greatly in character and have some great interactions, like Jonathan admitting that he could learn a lot from Tanjiro just judging on his raw talent, and Tanjiro's realization that Jonathan gets his power the same way that he does, and coming up with a plan of counterattack. The only line I'd say I'm mixed on is the caretaker line in the beginning. I understand the first part of the line, calling back to the comparison of Jonathan having the personality of a dog, but the follow-up for that, I don't know what they were trying to get at there, but I'll tell you what, it did not land, and it sounds... I don't think it was made with malicious intent behind it, or like with like a weird thing, but it just doesn't... It sounds weird, right? It's just like a very out-of-pocket thing to say. Does that make sense? The choreography is also great. I like how they take time to let both characters' advantages shine, like Tanjiro getting the upper hand due to his skill, experience, and just overall better swordsmanship, and Jojo gaining the upper hand due to just overwhelming Tanjiro with his raw strength and just the versatility of Hamon. The sprite rigging to me is very fluid and free from most drink, minus a few scenes, but it doesn't linger long enough for it to be like a pressing issue. But it's the end of this fight that really steals the show. Tanjiro goes for Jonathan's lungs after finding out how his powers work, and eventually gets what he thinks is a killing blow. But Jonathan dodges by 2 inches, which is the most incredibly JoJo thing ever, and Jonathan delivering one of the best final rushes in the entire series, while Benji screams Sunlight Yellow Overdrive like he's screaming bloody murder, resulting in one of my favorite killing blows of the series, and is only topped by very few episodes higher up on this list, and brings tears to my eyes like even now. I can think of very few voice actor moments in Death Battle that are on par or above Benji's delivery during this final rush, and in my opinion is only second to Lanny's final flash in Vegeta vs. Thor. And the following scene with Jonathan giving Tanjiro a merciful death is still one of the most unique and tragic deaths in this series. I loved that they decided to experiment with a more tragic and merciful death in this episode, and explore the consequences of what happens when one fighter kills another. It was actually it was a theme with season 9, I feel like. They experimented with different kinds of deaths and different emotions behind those certain deaths. I thought that was a very interesting thing that they experimented with in season 9, and I really appreciated it here. I mentioned this in my ranking of the season, but it is a thought that always lingers whenever I watch these episodes. The consequences of one of these characters killing another, and the people the losers are leaving behind when they die. It's something I probably shouldn't think about, since it's not like these deaths are canonical, but it's still something that comes to my mind, especially when they're characters I care about and know, and by that proxy, I know what they're leaving behind when they're killed like this. But in short, I love this episode. It's one of the most beautiful sprite fight episodes they've ever done, has some of the best voice acting in the series, and one of the best deaths and just emotional beats behind it. Quite the introduction for Demon Slayer though, and in my opinion, unless Rengoku vs. Mirio or Alphonse vs. Nezuko does something similar, I doubt any future Demon Slayer episodes are going to top this episode.
Show me a move, show me a move, show me a move, show me a move, show me a move.
Season 6 was a pretty good season for Death Battle. While it did bring us some episodes that weren't super beloved by the general public,
Time, huh?
It did bring us some of the most popular and most memorable episodes in the series' history. For better or for worse. While a lot of people might say that Might vs. Might or Ganon vs. Dracula is their favorite of the season, the first episode that comes to my mind when I think of Season 6 is Uncaged vs. Captain Falcon. While the other episodes this season might be remembered for its great music or climax, or the great tone and the clash of characters, or pissing off an entire fan base worth of people, this one is memorable to me just because of how fun it is. This includes the rundowns as well. I actually had a lot of fun rewatching these rundowns for this video. A lot of great jokes throughout, and it was really fun learning more about Captain Falcon's more obscure canon like his anime, comics, and whatever else. I also forgot that Captain Falcon isn't just one guy, but actually a moniker that is inherited throughout generations, which makes his matchup with All Might make a lot more sense to me. But, I mean, besides the very fun rundown, there's not really much to talk about. Great jokes, great just covering of the characters, really liked it. And the fight is an absolute blast. Compared to the personal attachment I have to Ichigo vs. Naruto and the great tone and tragedy of Tanjiro vs. Jonathan, Cage vs. Falcon is here just because it's just fun. The combat is quick and fun and all flows together really well. It was very clear that they had a pretty limited amount of sprites for Falcon, but they managed to make the most out of what they had, and I say it worked out pretty well for them. They managed to sneak in all the staples from both franchises, working in basically all of Falcon's Smash Brothers moves, and working in all of the Mortal Kombat staples like Johnny's Super Duper Ball Buster, the Whoopsie meme, the X-Ray, the basics. And the latter half of the fight where they move to fighting on the track and on top of the cars is so incredibly hype, and it's only elevated by the adrenaline pumping track of Falcon Uncaged. If not for this track, this fight wouldn't feel nearly as exhilarating, as well as the writing. The interactions between the two are some of the most enjoyable parts of this episode, like Falcon's reaction to Johnny going for the nuts, their initial interaction when Johnny says he'll be playing Captain Falcon, basically all of Johnny's lines, really, he's great in this episode. I don't play Mortal Kombat, but it does look like they kept the core of his character intact, which is great to see because not every episode gets that luxury, which is only helped by his great voice actor. In terms of the specific moments I liked, I loved this shot of Johnny using the speed booster tiles on the track to give him an extra boost and basically launches himself towards Falcon. The ball buster shot is, once again, a classic. I love this scene where they fight on top of the cars and Falcon hits Johnny with the knee, and of course the death, which is just so cool. I love the energy Keston Howard gives when he yells "come on" to Johnny as the flawless guitar solo from the track starts to kick in, and runs the dude over with his car, then activates the boost fire and freaking shreds up Johnny, giving him a pretty good almost death scream. My only real complaint here is after getting hit by basically a giant deadly Beyblade, Johnny's body doesn't look nearly torn up or bloodied or anything. He still looks like he hasn't been touched at all. Minor nitpick, but I wanted to mention it. And then, of course, we get the Falcon Punch. There's no other way a Falcon win could end. And Keston's delivery was outstanding as usual. The cut to a distant explosion was kind of a letdown, but I didn't mind it that much, especially since we saw the initial impact of the punch. We just didn't see Johnny blow into bits. In short, this episode is an absolute blast. I feel like people get super caught up in the finales or the super popular spectacle matchups that sometimes just the regular episodes can go very unnoticed. And sometimes I don't want some big climactic anime battle, but something a bit more low scale, but still just as hype. And to me, that's what Falcon vs. Cage is. It's a great low scale fight with some incredibly hype moments, but it's not anything super groundbreaking or series defining, which kind of just defies Captain Falcon in a nutshell, huh? Oh, right, last thing. I mentioned earlier that the rundown was really fun and whatnot, but they missed one crucial detail that's been updated now. They say that Captain Falcon gets his pyrokinesis from his car, but thanks to Sakurai, we now know that it's not from his car, it's from his devout faith and love in Jesus Christ. So you gotta update that, Death Battle. Oh boy, another Bleach episode, who would have guessed? Or more like the only other Bleach episode that exists. Madara vs. Aizen, a highly anticipated episode when it came out, and while I did enjoy it when it did premiere, with me having seen Naruto by that point so I could at least appreciate Madara's side of the episode, and now one I appreciate even more now having seen Bleach. This is a battle between two of my favorite villains in anime, so naturally this was going to be something I was about to enjoy. I ended up really liking the rundowns for both. There's some great edits and it goes over both characters' history very well. It also had quite a few gags in there that I liked, specifically Wiz explaining Madara's incredibly complicated plan to take over the world. The Aizen chair joke wasn't quite as good in my opinion, but I thought it was a decent enough cutaway. Now, the fight, which is just a really cool villain fight. These two feel like they were meant to have cool interactions with each other, and it shows in both how they talk with each other and how their powers interact. I love how the battle progresses. It turns into not a fight between two men, but between two godlike beings as the battle turns from a battle in a desert to a battle taking place amidst the rubble of a falling meteor that was destroyed as a byproduct of their fight, with their powers becoming crazier and crazier as it reaches its climax. In terms of specific moments, I liked when Aizen used the Black Coffin. Madara intentionally let himself get trapped in it to give him time to activate the Ten Tails, resulting in this great shot where we see the silhouette of the beast in front of Aizen. And then immediately afterwards, we're greeted with a great reference shot with the meteor looming overhead. And one more similar shot later where we see the shadow of the Susanoo before it swipes the clouds in half. This episode, I noticed, does a very good job of showing just the scale of how powerful these two are. Most episodes that do involve characters that have these great, like, larger than planet level abilities and, like, just have, like, this great scale to them, when they're put into a death battle, usually that stuff isn't shown nearly as well. Like, they have these, like, great, like, planet destroying abilities, but when they actually fight, like, the worst thing they do is they cut like a mountain in half or whatever, and a lot of the times it's very underwhelming. So with this episode, it's actually very cool to see like just the scale of how powerful these two are, with just like meteors getting destroyed as like a byproduct of how powerful they are. I think that was really cool. The animation is very fun and makes great use of all of their abilities, making sure to at least use the recognizable attacks and techniques that the two of them are more known for. They make good use of both their illusions, having one at the very end and having one at the very beginning, and you know, the one at the end foreshadowing Madara, the using of the Sharingan on Aizen before the end. I would have liked for the back and forth between their illusions to go on for a bit more, kind of leaning more into the whole illusion thing, connection between the two. But I think what they did here was still pretty good and a great fake out, and Madara's ending line at the end is also one of my favorite deliveries in the series. Weirdly enough, I don't really have a lot to say about this episode compared to the one so far. I guess because a lot of the appeal from this episode comes mainly from the spectacle as compared to the last three that still have their fair share of spectacle, but just have more character moments and interactions to talk about and kind of spark up like a theme, I guess. That being said, I still love this episode, which just goes to show the good record Bleach episodes have on the show. Hopefully when we get more Bleach episodes in the future, God, Death Battle, please, the streak keeps going, and maybe we'll get a win in the process.
I am your father.
Nuh-uh.
The fuck you mean, nah?
Yeah, anyone who saw my Season 10 video should have seen this coming. Darth Vader vs. Obito Uchiha was an episode that I had been wanting for the better part of 2 years, and when it finally came out, I had really high expectations for it, to which they thankfully delivered on. The fight delivers on basically everything I could have wanted from a fight between these two characters. Great displays of power, a tragic undertone, amazing exchanges between the two, with them like recognizing the darkness within each other and themselves, you know, stuff like that. I'm still under the opinion that this shot of Vader standing tall as the Ten Tails looms over him while charging a blast is one of the best shots in the series' history, and the interaction between the two right before is one of my all-time favorite character exchanges as well.
You've lost your humanity as well.
On the path of the dark side, it is inevitable.
I mentioned this in the review, but Vader is kept really well in character during this fight. Darth Vader is one of, if not my favorite fictional villain ever made, so I was really happy with how he was handled in this episode, and they could not have done it better. Similarly to how he was treated in more modern appearances, he's treated almost like an unstoppable horror movie villain, bulldozing through everything Obito throws at him with confidence and certainty. Even when he's facing a large monstrous beast the size of a mountain charging up a huge energy blast, all he has to say is impressive. Even towards the very end of the fight, he remains level-headed, with Obito being the one to lose his cool at several points instead of him. And the death, of course, is amazing. The illusion, the tragedy, the final line from Obito, it's just perfect. Like I said before, I've gone over this episode twice already, once in an independent review and another during my Season 10 ranking, so if you want something a bit more in detail, then I recommend those videos. But in short, I love this episode. It's one of my favorite villain fights of the series. It has some of the best visuals, it has some of the best fight choreography, has some of the best like interactions, it has everything you could want in a villain fight, and it's what I wanted in a Darth Vader episode, and this basically gave me everything I wanted in one nice little package. So, you know, thank God it was this and not Saber, am I right, folks?
Get your money up, not your funny up, Dante.
It's weird that Sephiroth vs. Vergil was in my top 10 for the longest time, even though I didn't really know it at first. Even though I didn't know anything about either franchise for basically since recently. Since then, I've started playing Final Fantasy VII, so now I have a bit more of a connection to Sephiroth outside of the surface level he looks cool factor, so I can appreciate at least him a bit more, and I do plan on playing the Devil May Cry series actually very soon. But even without that, this episode is still amazing. One thing about it off rip is that I do find it weird that this was the episode that they decided to end the season with. Not that the episode isn't good, it's number 5 for a reason, but it doesn't really feel like a season finale, if that makes sense. Finale episodes like All Might vs. Might Guy and Galactus vs. Unicron feel like finale episodes just because of the scale and feel of it. But this just feels like a very good regular episode. This doesn't take away any points from the episode itself, obviously, it's just a weird meta point that I wanted to bring up. The rundowns are good, nothing really to write home about besides the fact that they go into both characters' history really well, though there is one thing about the rundowns that kind of confuses me. Final Fantasy VII and Devil May Cry are on a pretty high scale when it comes to power scaling, right? At least they are now. obviously not high-end Marvel or DC level, but most of the stronger characters like Cloud, Sephiroth, Dante, Vergil are high above planet level and probably a lot higher, right? So why do they focus on significantly lower scale feats throughout the episode? Maybe for DMC it's because this episode took place before stuff like DMC 5, and for Final Fantasy they explain in the conclusion that there aren't a lot of direct feats for Sephiroth to draw from, but still, considering the reputation of these two characters for their insane strength, it's weird that they focus on feats that feel so low scale compared to what we know that they're capable of at their peak. But it's not a really big issue, it's not even a criticism, it's just something I personally found confusing. Anyways, it's fight time now, and at long last we get our first Torian fight of my top 10 list, which I'm sure a lot of you expected to see at least one of his episodes on this list, because why wouldn't it be? He's an absolutely fantastic animator that left a permanent mark on the series. And in my opinion, there are very few 3D animated episodes that came out after him that have not come close to matching his best work, to which I consider this episode to be his best sword fight he's ever done. The fluidity of the swordplay and the displays of speed are some of the best in the show, and the different displays of each fighter's magic is used in very creative and fun ways. The biggest one, obviously, is when Sephiroth displays his cunning by using clones to buy himself time to heal himself, but watching Vergil use different things in his arsenal to dispose of said clones was also really fun and creative. Specifically Vergil, I think they did a great job of showcasing his speed advantage, with that being the thing that initially gives him a leg up on Sephiroth for a bit, blitzing and barraging him with a flurry of blades. Do they spend a bit too much time on the clones? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but at least the scene with Vergil fending them off is fun and showcases again his speed and versatile arsenal. And it all plays into Sephiroth's strategy at the end, so it did have a purpose. I also enjoyed the voice acting quite a bit. Kamran Nikad as Sephiroth did an amazing job of capturing that cold, almost disinterested tone that Sephi always has. And while he only has a few lines throughout the fight, he delivers all of them to great effect. Can't believe that this is the same guy that gave us Vergil is voiced by Mark Soskin, who you might all know as Gon, because he was a very prominent voice actor in Dragon Ball Z Abridged, being the voice of Tien, Android 17, Jace, and Raccoon. It was funny because I knew Vergil sounded familiar when I was rewatching this episode, and when I was researching it, I finally realized why. He also does a great job of giving Vergil a very well reserved and collected tone, which I don't know if that's accurate to the character, someone will have to let me know, but I personally felt like it felt in character. The death is also amazing. Once again showing off Sephiroth's cunning by putting up an illusion after noticing Vergil's ability to cut through dimensions with a sword, only revealing Supernova at the last minute. And also showcasing Vergil's sword's ability to, again, cut through dimensions by cutting through Sephiroth's Supernova, since they did establish earlier in the episode that that was how the move worked, which I thought was a really cool touch. Then, just when Vergil thinks he's safe, Sephiroth appears behind him, stabs him with a reference, delivers one last really cold line, and then cuts him in half. Great ending to the fight. Like I said before, despite this being a great episode, it is weird that they decided on this for the finale. I think it could have worked better if they framed the fight a bit differently. Sephiroth is definitely worthy of a finale episode, being one of the most popular and prolific villains in video games, and I think if this episode came out after Devil May Cry 5, this definitely would have had the ability to be a banger finale. But this feels less like a finale episode and more like an episode that would come out right before the finale, like a Madara vs. Aizen, if that makes sense. But in any case, I still think this episode is amazing and definitely deserves being called one of my favorite episodes of the series. Though I would love to see both of these characters return, though I'm not really sure who against. I don't know what like Vergil and Sephiroth's other opponents are. Like I know Sephiroth has Aizen, but they did Aizen already, and Vergil, I have no idea.
Hey there, everybody. This is Ryu from Streets.
Alright, y'all, I hope you're ready for a Torian parade, because that's what these last few spots are about to be. Starting with Sephi versus Vergil, now on to Ryu versus Jin, a matchup with two franchises, one I know nothing about, and the other I only know a little bit about because I started playing Street Fighter 6 this year. Ryu vs. Jin, probably the best Street Fighter episode to ever be made, with only TJ vs. Balrog being able to match it. But in my opinion, just doesn't match the adrenaline rush and pure display of martial arts choreography that this episode has. The rundowns were great, They do a great job of balancing story with feat coverage while keeping it well paced all the same. Jin specifically I found to be a bit more interesting and also coming out on top in terms of the comedy aspect. I know some people don't like the Wolverine joke with Heihachi, but I personally find it hysterical. It has that perfect blend of corny and perfect comedic timing that I can't help but love it. But besides that, yeah, just very, very fun, very great rundowns. Ryu was a bit... Actually, no, they did a good job with Ryu because they made it like a bit more unique compared to the last one with Scorpion. But yeah, I like them both. And the fights... Just where do I even start? It's like Torian knew that this was his last time directing an episode and decided, yeah, I'll just go all out, why not? And delivered the best martial arts based episode the series has ever seen. Every combo, exchange of punches, display of power, it's all just so fluid and creative. And I love how it progressively gets crazier and crazier, with them starting in a dojo with a regular sparring match, to fighting in a collapsing cave throwing energy blasts and nuclear attacks at each other. And despite neither character having voice actors, they were able to use the already existing voice lines for both characters to great effect, to the point where you can't even really notice that they were already existing voice lines. The track also elevates that ramping up in intensity that I mentioned earlier. It starts really low-key during the dojo section, but once Jin and Ryu turn into their evil forms, it starts ramping up in such an adrenaline-pumping way. The cave section is also incredibly hype. Seeing stuff like Jin running across the falling rocks as Ryu barrages him with blasts, and then the following scene of them fighting on top of another falling rock is so incredible. This shot in particular is one of the singular greatest scenes in the series. Seeing their fight flow so fluidly and seeing each attack flow perfectly into the next, all to end with Ryu tripping Jin up with a Hadouken only to kick him into another rock that shatters, that's one of the hypest things this show's entire run has had. And then the oomph behind their following clash is incredible. The only way that this fight gets brought down is the admittedly weak death. It's not bad per se, it's just somewhat sudden, and the power of nothingness just kind of pops out, wins immediately, and then that's it. I would have liked to see a cool sense of contrast between the power of nothingness and the Devil Jin, since the forms are basically polar opposites, but instead it just kind of comes off out of nowhere and at the last minute, and just one shot to Jin. Unfortunate, but it's not nearly bad enough of a moment for me to bring the episode down from where it is, like, at all. Despite being an episode that came out 5 years ago, it still stands as one of the best 3D animated episodes in this whole series, and is a highlight for fighting game episodes. I wouldn't even say that I want Ryu to come back after this, cause I don't feel like anything could top this for him. Jin maybe, since multiple Tekken games have come out since this episode, and I'm pretty sure he's had some pretty big character changes since then. So he does probably deserve a second look, but for Ryu, despite Street Fighter 6 coming out, there's nothing really a whole lot left for him to do except fight with a more heavy focus on the power of nothingness, which would be cool, but for me it's not nearly enough to justify him coming back. I'd rather them shine more of a light on other more underrepresented characters from Street Fighter, like Luke. I'd love to see Luke on. I think he'd be a great character to have on Death Battle, even though I don't really know who he'd fight.
Jarvis, scan this guy's balls.
Despite being 10 seasons into this series, Death Battle's second season still remains one of the most memorable seasons out of its entire run, simply because it was the season that cemented them as part of the YouTube web series Hall of Fame, a show where you knew you could go if you wanted high quality writing, animation, and action, which is more than I can say for some web shows now. Anyways, Season 2 had a lot of episodes that still to this day live in infamy in the show's lore. Deadpool vs. Deathstroke, Wolverine vs. Raiden, Snake vs. Sam, Goku vs. Superman 2, but the one that in my opinion stands above them all is the one and only Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor. The rundowns are really enjoyable. Lex's, I noticed, was more character focused than Tony's, surprisingly, since they dedicated basically the entire end of his rundown just to mention how much the dude hates Superman, which I thought was really interesting, but it is kind of a shame that Tony's rundown didn't really touch on the alcoholism except for the end, or any of Tony's other big character flaws besides his recklessness. But besides that, the rundowns are still really enjoyable, and I actually found it pretty interesting seeing how their origins connected and contrasted and stuff. And the fight, well, there's a reason this episode is number 3 on this ranking. This is one of the best fights the series has ever put out, and despite being 9 years old, geez Louise, most modern episodes have yet to reach the heights that this episode has. Obviously, the highlight of the entire thing is Tony's "I've been playing human" line, which without a doubt is one of my favorite one-liners in the entire show, but there's also plenty of other great moments that deserve mention. In terms of the comedy, the running joke of Tony constantly racking up a heftier collateral damage fee throughout the whole fight is really funny. And both of Tony's and Lex's reaction to the Batmobile getting destroyed is also great. Then there's stuff like Tony dragging Lex up a building side, Tony's attack line reference, and then Lex's speech at the end, which I thought was really great, even though Lex kind of turns into sweet tooth at the end there. And none of these great line deliveries, by the way, would be possible without the work of both of the incredibly talented voice actors that they got for this. Iron Man, for those of you who don't know, is voiced by Chuck Huber, the actual voice actor for characters like Android 17 and Hiei, and Lex is voiced by the incredibly talented, incredibly funny Gianni Mara.